Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. A health crisis, an economic crisis, a mass experiment. We are faced with the biggest challenge of our time, a health crisis that threatens people around the world. We are faced with an unprecedented economic crisis. And to make the challenge even more difficult, we all asked to work remotely. Not very many people are accustomed to working remotely. And how do we get psychological ready for it? How does working remotely affect psychological health? How do you make sure that people stay focused, committed, and happy in the situation that we are facing? The challenges are many. Today, we'll be joined by one of the world's best speechwriters, Simon Lancaster. With over 3 million views on some of his TED Talks, Simon is someone that is being listened to. Simon began his career as a speechwriter for politicians, and over the last 10 years, he's helped business people around the world to communicate to their employees. Today, we will learn from Simon about how we communicate in a crisis when people are fearful, anxious, and uncertain. Simon will help us understand the necessity to step up and why communication is more important than ever. We are privileged to work closely with Simon to help many executives become better at communicating on our programs. ABT Business School always tries to find the best people around the world to help managers, leaders, and organizations to get the right balance between purpose, people, and performance. Today, we hope that you will be inspired to help you, your people, and your organization. The agenda for today is that the webinar lasts 30 minutes. And in the last 5 minutes, there will be time for Q&A. We will be hosting more webinars in the coming weeks, and we already had lined up a professor from MIT to help us get an organization ready to handle a crisis. So if you're interested, please follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter, and we'll send you the information about the next webinar. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome Simon Lancaster to this webinar with the title, Communicating in a Crisis. Simon?
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Jesper, and thank you very much for organising this very, very timely webinar. And thank you very much, all of you, for joining, and welcome to my home on top of a sunny-ish mountain in the Brecon Beacons, which is a national park in Wales here in the UK. My family are downstairs. I'm up here with a nice mug of tea. I hope you've got one too. Today I'm going to talk about communicating in a crisis, as Jesper said, but I want to start, if I may, by telling you a little story. Every Saturday morning I take my daughters horse riding just over on the other side of the mountain. It's a lovely thing for them and for me. It's lovely for them after a hard week at school to get on a horse and go out into the countryside. And for me, I love nothing more than going to the cafe, spreading out the weekend papers and enjoying a huge English breakfast. Danish bacon, of course. But a few weeks ago, I was driving my girls to go riding, and I was going down my lane when all of a sudden my brakes packed up. I pumped hard and there was no response. It was terrifying. We were hurtling down the hill, rapidly picking up pace, and I knew there was a junction at the bottom where you could get lorries going down, and it was one of these split split-second moments where I didn't think, I just instinctively and instantly threw the steering wheel hard right and took the car sharp into the side of my lane, where it wedged into a jagged tree stump. There was a terrible crash. My headlights were smashed, the bonnet collapsed, and the radiator burst, sending water gushing down the lane. The crash cost £1,800 for me to repair. It wasn't money I wanted to spend. Not once, though, have I questioned that what I did was the right thing. Sometimes in life, we face these challenges where there's no time to think, we just have to act, and we do just do it instantly because we know some things in life are much, much, much more precious than money. Now, I think that over the last few weeks, the whole world has steered hard into the side of the road. We're living in times that I don't think any of us ever expected to see in our lifetimes. Planes grounded, schools shut, cities deserted, even Broadway shows halted in New York, the Champs-Élysées empty. It's the stuff of nightmares, the kind of thing that we're only used to really seeing in Hollywood movies. And people around the world are really worried about this with real questions. Will I lose my job? Can I pay my bills? What happens if I get ill? What's going to happen to my loved ones? When does this end? How does it end? What will the consequences be of all of this isolation? Will I go crazy spending all of this time on my own, or on the other side, will I go crazy if I spend too much time with my family? These are uncertain times. And of course, it's in times of crisis that we look to leaders more than ever. The role of the leader is to fill these empty gaps in our life and to join things together, to make sense of them, to find order in the chaos, to replace fear with hope, and to provide a sense of connection, pride, and purpose when we're feeling lost, aimless, scared, and even when we're unwell. As leaders, we normally know how to do this. This is kind of what the leader does. But as the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said the other week, this is different. We're in uncharted territories, unknown lands, and we don't have all the answers. And as leaders ourselves, we are grappling with real dilemmas about how honest we should be about the uncertainty ahead. And how do we keep moving forward if we don't know where we're going? And we don't know the answers to all of these questions. But today, I want to talk a little bit about how leaders might communicate during times of crisis. And I just want to share some early thoughts based on examining some of the communication that we've seen from leaders over the last few days, revisiting some of the old timeless principles of communication, and share with you a very, very practical template for crisis communication, which you can all instantly put into practice. Because over the last few weeks, few days, we've seen incredible communication from around the world, and not least in Denmark. I think Mette Frederiksen and Queen Margaret have both been an inspiration. And in fact, it was Mette Frederiksen's response, her emergency statement last Wednesday, which prompted me personally to do a big shake-up in my life. I followed the lead that was coming from Copenhagen. I consider myself kind of, I don't know, honorary Danish. I'm over at AVT so frequently these days. And so it was last Thursday, after the Prime Minister's statement on the Wednesday, that I took the decision to take my own girls out of school ahead of the decision here in the UK. My village school is still open today. It's still not been closed. And it was also this time last week that I took the decision to just pull everything out of my diary and instantly just swept it clear for the next 2 months. So we've seen incredible communication coming out of Denmark, but obviously it's not just there. We're seeing it from around the world, from political, business and scientific leaders. Emmanuel Macron with his extraordinary Nous sommes en garde speech, the footballer turned hotelier, Gary Neville here in the UK. I don't know if any of you have seen this. He owns a few hotels. He announced that he was basically just going to close them all down, keeping all of the staff on full pay, no redundancies, and he's handed over the keys to them to the National Health Service. And also Dr. Tedros, the DG from the World Health Organization, with his daily briefings and his remorseless, relentless focus on getting across this message to all countries in the world: test, test, test. So we've been seeing some amazing communication, which has reminded us of some of the things we all know about what makes good communication, the importance of empathy, showing you're on people's side, that you have their back, the extraordinary power of metaphor and its ability to make real things which are abstract, and the never-ending power, of course, of such simple rhetorical devices as repetition, rhyme, the rule of three. But what I want to set out for you today is a quick and easy to use template for crisis communication, a crisis speech, crisis rhetoric, which you can use. And this is a template that I first wrote about in my book, Speechwriting, the Expert Guide, which I wrote 11 years ago now, never for 1 second thinking it might be of use in a crisis like this, but it's been quite interesting comparing what I wrote back then with some of the speeches that we've seen over the last few days. So I'm going to walk you through this structure and with reference to some of these recent speeches to explain to you how it works in practice. It's a 4-step structure and it's based around a simple mnemonic, which is fear, F-E-A-R. Now, I'm not a fan of PowerPoint, as any of you who have been on my workshops will know. So I've gone a bit Bob Dylan for this. And with the help of my daughters who are homeschooling at the moment, they've prepared for me some rather more traditional PowerPoint slides. So we're going to start with F for facts. Isn't that wonderful? There we go. So facts, we start with facts. We start with facts because people are craving knowledge right now. They want to know what's going in. So we start off with an authoritative statement of facts. This sets the tone, it establishes trust, it meets people's needs. So we play it totally straight from the beginning, wholly rational, straight bat, explaining clearly what we do and don't know, being absolutely honest about what we don't know, which is why I think there were so many plaudits for Mette Fredriksen's admission that some mistakes will be made along the way. People love this kind of honesty, and it's where we establish our ethos, earning our credibility, so keeping calm, steady, controlled breathing, feet very firmly on the ground. And I think Queen Margaret's statement the other day, her very steady breathing, just like our Queen here, exactly the same way, just lowering the temperature, calming people down. People are heightened enough without their leaders ramping them up initially. So that's where we start, facts. Then we move on to E. There we go, E. E for enemy. You highlight what it is that people are up against right now. We all know that critical to any narrative, any good story, is a sense of conflict. And it's the struggle between the protagonist and the forces of antagonism which creates the energy, the dynamism, which motivates people, which gets people moving. We're defined in opposition to what we are not, you know, so we need this for kind of our own identity. Without Darth Vader, you know, Luke Skywalker was just a boring old farm boy. We know what we are in opposition to what we are not. Now, the enemy in this context might be literal. For instance, you know, the infection itself, complacency, or it might be a group of people who are panic buying. You know, like with Emmanuel Macron's Nous sommes en guerre speech, where he condemned those, I quote, people in France going around cafes and parks like nothing has changed. You're not protecting the rest of us. even if you have no symptoms, you can still transmit the virus to your friends, parents, grandparents. And of course, this is a sentiment that we're seeing being articulated around the world. But enemies don't have to be literal. They can be made more real or conjured up through metaphor. Now, any of you who have been on my workshops will know all about the extraordinary power of metaphor, how through fictitious imagery, we can dramatically shift people's perceptions, opinions, and behaviors on issues ranging from whether we should invest in companies, support policies, and even on matters of life and death. In the last few days, we've seen an avalanche of metaphors, but two particular metaphors seem to be emerging. Now, the first is the idea of coronavirus as a foreign invader. So Queen Margaret said the coronavirus is a dangerous guest in her speech. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki said we need to close the door to the pandemic, saying it had been imported in the strict sense of the words. And President Macron in France said the virus does not need a passport. Now, the idea that we're being invaded leads our minds naturally onto the next step, and a further metaphor, which is the metaphor of war. A metaphor I'm sure you can't have failed to notice is very important in the rhetoric of people like Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, and other rather more macho leaders right now. There's lots of talk about front lines and battalions and weapons. And of course, any of you who followed the Brexit debate will know that Boris Johnson loves nothing more than speaking out of his huge arse and all of war metaphors, which is precisely what he's doing now. And of course, this was imagery which formed the basis of Macron's Nous sommes en guerre speech. He said, the enemy is there, it's advancing, and we need to mobilize. We are at war, and the entire activity of the government and parliament needs to be fighting this pandemic. Of course, the war metaphor serves a purpose. It quickly establishes meaning. It brings people together, creates solidarity. It suggests purpose. It's also a natural metaphor, which clinicians use regularly for speaking about infections. But of course, this is not the only possible metaphor. As I alluded to earlier, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has talked about uncharted territory, describing this as a new land which we're journeying through. And this is the same metaphor we hear coming out of the World Health Organization right now. So Dr. Tedros from the World Health Organization talked about the virus. He talked about we're walking blindfolded through a fire. There's no right or wrong between these two different metaphors. Different metaphors, as we know, have different connotations and therefore different consequences. But for my analysis, the war metaphor will show power and invite you to put faith in the general and do whatever he tells you to do. You know, don't challenge, don't question, just do what you're told. The unknown journey metaphor for me puts you in a completely different frame. It shows more humility and rather, for me, actively invites people to contribute their knowledge. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but they're just different. So that's not number two, enemy. Number three, A for action. There we go. Having framed the speech and created an appropriate emotional backdrop, we're then in a position to issue our asks. And this is where we get our messages across. So this kind of like the body of what we want to say. And the best way for conveying this is using some of those old school rhetorical devices that we all know so well, like repetition, the rule of three, rhyme. We know rhymes have long been used in public health campaigns anyway, from an apple a day keeps the doctor away, to coughs and sneezes spread diseases. The rhyme makes it more memorable, more believable, easier for people to pass on to other people. And likewise, the rule of three is very good. We know that just putting things in threes instantly makes something sound more credible, compelling, and convincing, just like that. So we've seen examples of this all over the world for getting messages across. Here in the UK, our National Health Service put out posters in respect to coronavirus saying, catch it, bin it, kill it. Beautiful, rule of three, repetition, breathless sentences. But I think the best example, again, Dr. Tedros from the World Health Organization, when he said, I quote, "We have a simple message for all countries. Test, test, test." In rhetorical terms, if you're interested, that's called epizeuxis, where you repeat the same word 3 times in that form, like location, location, location. Very powerful rhetorical device. And of course, as soon as he'd said it, the video went right around the world, as did the message. So a very effective rhetorical device. Now on to step number 4, rewards. We must end by giving people an incentive to move forward. Remind them why we're doing this, why it's all worth it. People won't move forward unless they know there's something attractive for them waiting at the end. It's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, if you like. So we should end positive and optimistic with high rhetoric, a big grand appeal to unity, values, hope. We see all of the leaders anxious to convey this at the moment, to give people a sense of optimism during these difficult times. As Macron did in his speech, when he said, the day after our victory, we will not be going back to normal. We will take on a higher moral power. We will have learned things, and I, like you, will understand all of the consequences. So let us raise ourselves up individually and collectively to the height demanded by this moment. Many other leaders have talked about the solidarity which is being forged now, lasting long after we are through this. And again, as Dr. Tedros said, like me, I'm sure you've been touched by the videos of people unloading health workers from their balconies, or the stories of people offering to do grocery shopping for people in their community. The amazing spirit of human solidarity must become even more infectious than the virus itself. Although we may have to be physically apart from each other, we can come together in ways we never have before. We're all in this together. We can only succeed together. And I'm going to end my speech on that note, because I think it brings us back to a number of the themes that we started with. And I think, you know, the most important thing for us to remember when communicating at times like this is to remember that everyone we're communicating with is a human being just like us, with fears like us, very real fears like us, anxieties like us, a need to belong like us, a need to be valued like us, a need to have direction like us, and a need to be involved like us. So as leaders, we should rise up and meet those needs, address those fears, allay those anxieties, meet people's needs, make them feel valued, give them direction, make them feel involved. And by doing that, not only will you be meeting some of their deepest needs, but also you'll be ensuring that they will give you all of the support that you're looking for, not just for now, but long after this crisis is finished, because sometime or other we will get out of the ditch, get the car back on the road. And when we do, maybe we will have lost a bit of money, but we'll all have our health and we'll have one another, and we should emerge with a much clearer sense of who we are, where we're going, what it's all about, more mindful of our responsibilities to ourselves, to one another, and to the planet. So thank you very much. I imagine my tea has gone a bit cold now, but we do have some time for questions. So back to you, Jesper.
Thank you very much, Simon. And one of the questions that we have here is that, of course, using fear is what you suggest. So the facts, enemy, action, and reward is an approach that you can take when you communicate. But some of the questions we get at is also on the short interactions. So would you go through in every conversation, you could say more or less, is one of the questions here. You know, some facts, looking at who's the enemy, looking at action, looking at reward every single time, or just is there any other tools or tricks you can pose in everyday conversation, more or less?
The structure that I have set out there, the fear structure, is for the big crisis speech that leaders sometimes have to give. In more day-to-day, more typical interactions, I would recommend my final bit of advice that I was saying at the end. It's remembering that people are human beings, first and foremost. Remembering how the brain works, that people are needing empathy. They need to be understood at the moment. So starting with some empathy, a recognition of our shared values, and then moving on to messages. One of the little things that I teach on the MBA is empathy, values, action, as a little technique which is really good for dealing with conversations. So showing you understand where people are coming from, reminding them of what you have in common, and then boom, giving them actually what your message is.
All right, thank you, Simon. Another question about the frequency. We get a few questions about that. You know, can you over communicate in this regard, or can you, how much information do you actually give people? So basically, can you over communicate?
Well, I think always with communication, the test is, what do my audience want? You know, and what do they need? What will they respond best to? Every single situation is different. There are some instances where the audiences would just wish the leader would shut up, you know, but there are other situations where you do, you know, if your people are needing daily reassurance, then give them that daily reassurance. It's about recognizing their needs and responding to those needs.
Thank you, Simon. Another question about if you have employees where someone has been infected, how do you convey that to other employees about being in a situation where, you know, you might have other people that needs to go in quarantine, or what other circumstances they might need to take care of? So what do you do there?
Well, I think I come back, this will be a bit repetitive. I'm sure a lot of questions are covering same things, but I think it's empathy, you know, showing empathy, compassion, sensitivity, treating other people like we would like to be treated ourselves. So presumably a big formal letter in that kind of instance would not be as welcome as a nice personal phone call.
All right. We've just got a few questions, time for a few more questions. So a few questions about who should actually communicate to the customers. You know, whose responsibility is it? Is it basically, should it come from the CEO or the one who you have a relationship? So it might be key account managers, sales reps, etc. Do you think that the CEO should get involved in the communication also to all customers, or how do you see that?
Well, I think the context at the moment is we are looking to hear clear messages from people at the top. I think it's a natural instinct when we feel lost, when we feel confused, to seek some kind of higher guidance. And so I think the examples that I have been looking at, you know, my expertise, my key focus is always, as you know, on leadership communication. So I've been looking at the way that CEOs have been putting out messages very effectively, at the power of that. But I guess it's going to be different in different companies, and you just need to make a judgment on what the most effective channel is going to be in each case. But I think leaders have to be involved, you know, and they need to be sending clear signals for people lower down in the organization.
All right, great. Thank you very much, and take care. And hopefully you got a bit of inspiration for how you can communicate going forward. All the best, and thank you for participating.